Several years ago, when I was a pastor in Northern California, my parents from Indiana had come out to visit us. And at the time, our sons were, I think, about 9 and 6 years old. And they wanted Grandma to help them plant some flowers before she left. So my mom had purchased several varieties of plants to put in our newly cultivated backyard. And it was the evening before she was to leave, and the plants were still not in the soil. So the boys urged Grandma to get them planted. Perhaps both my mom and my sons knew deep in themselves that if they did not get this done before she left, the chances of their survival in my care were pretty slim. So together, grandmother and grandsons sowed the good seeds. And after she had gone, the boys continued to tend to the soil and those seeds. They watered and they waited. And days went by, and days soon became weeks. Did I mention they were 9 and 6 boys? And then, all of a sudden, things began to miraculously grow. They kept springing forth. I was amazed. One day I went out to survey the progress, and I realized, though, that a neighbor, I was pretty sure, had snuck into our yard and planted some weeds in with that good soil. Because all sorts of things were coming up together. Well, actually, we had pretty good neighbors, and I guess no one of them probably snuck into our yard to do that dastardly deed. But I just couldn't quite figure out how the weeds were coming up with the good things I know my mom and boys had planted. I was having a difficult time standing there looking at it, trying to sort it out. For one thing, I'll confess now, I wasn't even really sure what my mom had planted with the boys, nor was I aware of what the good seed would look like once it began to grow. These were the definite problems. I stood there with a trowel in my hand and a puzzled look, I'm sure, on my face, looking at that garden and wondering what to remove and what to leave alone. And as I contemplated the situation, staring at the mixture of what I was relatively sure were seeds of good plants that had grown and weeds, I decided, well, the best thing was to just go back in the house and do nothing. At least for now. I could assess the whole thing once again when those plants had come to maturity, and it might be a little easier for me to decide what should stay and what should go. Well, so goes Jesus' parable of the weeds. Sometimes, oftentimes, it's extremely difficult to tell the good seeds and plants from the weeds. And if we are premature in making those judgments about what to keep and what to dig up, we may face the problem of uprooting potentially good plants. Jesus says this is a lot like the kingdom of heaven. The good plants and the weeds have to be able to grow side by side for now. Only at the harvest will the farmer make the decision what to save and what to destroy. The key is patience. Now, if you're anything like me, patience doesn't come easily. It's not always one of our best character traits. And yet, we're called to be patient. Jesus seems to tell us in the story that there is always room for redemption. There is always room for salvation to happen, even with the worst weeds among us. And so it appears that we must resist making a judgment too soon between good and evil, since we cannot always know who the righteous are and who the wicked are, or what might change before the end when the harvest comes. Attempts to separate the good from the bad may actually injure both, just as Michaela told the children. Ultimately, Jesus says the wicked ones might be redeemed. Perhaps even some of the good seeds did not even live up to their promise. And so the householder needed to ask the servants to refrain from uprooting the weeds at the early stage of the field's growth. One might damage good plants by too zealous weeding, or perhaps even worse, make a mistake, and a fruitful plant might be weeded and destroyed. This simple lesson appears in many familiar stories that we have known from childhood. Think for a moment of Scrooge. Well, they say it's Christmas in July and all that, so we can go for Christmas just for a moment. Scrooge in Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Doesn't he definitely look like a weed when that story opens? Many have already given a hope of him being anything more than the heartless person he has become. Yet through a series of experiences, he becomes a person full of love and care and compassion, and those around him are amazed. Or remember the story of the Beast in Grimm's Brothers' tale, Beauty and the Beast. The townspeople only see the ugliness of the beast. They want to destroy him, believing that he is evil. Yet through love and kindness shown to him by Belle, he is transformed into a new being, able to return the love that he has received. Many of us, though, have a hard time waiting and hoping for the evil around us to change. Being patient is not easy. However, I think that when Jesus calls us to be patient, he's not just calling us to go back in the house and sit down and hope that something better happens. We are to continue to be faithful disciples working for God's kingdom. We are to embody love and compassion and generosity. We're not to return evil for evil, but we are to return love in the face of evil. In this parable, Jesus reminds us of our call to discipleship as we continue to be workers in the field, living with good plants and with some weeds. The explanation of the parable of the weeds is words that Matthew has Jesus saying, but it's probably much less the words of Jesus and much more the words of Matthew. Matthew was writing to a community of people who were beginning to feel the pain of trying to be faithful in the midst of a world of weeds. They were being persecuted because of their faith and were experiencing hardships. And many of them wanted to abandon their faith. It was too hard. And here was a word of comfort and assurance for them in the midst of strife and despair. Matthew was telling Christians to hold fast to their faith in the faith